Do not open it alone. That's what the final journal said. Scribbled in red ink, barely legible, buried in the back of the attic under rotting tarps and forgotten furniture. But by the time I found those words, it was already too late. Before start this terrifying story, like and subscribe the Macabre History channel, and don't forget to press the bell icon. The door had been open for weeks, and whatever the Maddox family spent generations containing was already awake. You were never meant to hear this story, but now that you have, you will never unhear it. This isn't folklore. It's not ghost stories whispered by trembling neighbors. This is a legacy of science gone rotten, of genius fed through a meat grinder of guilt, secrecy, and unspeakable ambition. The Maddox Estate isn't haunted. It's contaminated, infected by something older than reason, and kept alive by the same curiosity that built every empire and burned every heretic. The Maddoxes were not just victims. They were participants, volunteers, engineers of their own undoing. And what they didn't do for power. They did it to prove a theory, that the human mind, when stripped of morality, can open doors not meant for man. You've heard of ghost towns. This was a ghost family, disappearing one by one across decades, leaving behind blueprints, notes, diagrams, and a final experiment they never finished. Or maybe they did, and we're all just living inside the result. If you're still watching, understand this. What you're about to see will not entertain you. It will confront you. It will reveal the anatomy of a corruption so refined, so disciplined, it disguised itself as science. This house, this bloodline, was the petri dish for something too monstrous to describe, but too important to ignore. The Maddoxes didn't die. They transformed, and the thing that waits inside the walls of their ancestral home, Teat remembers. Every test, every failure, every scream. Stay with me. Don't look away. This isn't about them anymore. This is about you, because once you know what they did, you'll start to hear the same footsteps, feel the same cold spots, and dream the same impossible dreams. You'll understand what they tried to contain, and why it still wants out. This is the descent, and once we begin, there is no return. The townspeople never spoke of the Maddoxes directly. At most, they'd mutter something vague like, "They kept to themselves," or "Some families carry a burden you don't ask about." But beneath those evasions was fear, ancient and active. Not the kind born from superstition, but the kind earned through generational memory. People remembered screams echoing from that valley during the war winters. They remembered the fires that didn't burn hot, only bright. And they remembered the deliveries, crates too heavy for one man to lift, arriving under moonlight with no return address. This wasn't just a family with secrets. This was a family that served something. The Maddox patriarch, Edmund, didn't just build a mansion. He built a vessel, a containment zone, a stage for something no church would sanctify, no university would fund. His journals didn't speak in metaphor. They recorded procedures, measurements, variables, subjects. And over time those subjects turned into reagents, donors, and eventually just units. By the turn of the century, the Maddox Estate had stopped burying its dead in town. They were no longer considered part of the community. They were something separate, a species with its own rules, its own language. The phrase that kept surfacing in their writings was threshold biology, a theory that the human mind, when pushed through trauma and isolation, doesn't break. It mutates, evolves, becomes receptive to things not of this world. The more I read, the more I understood the house was never meant to be a home. It was a crucible, a sanctified lab built over burial soil, and the arrangement mentioned again and again in their ledgers. It wasn't with banks or governments. It was with something far older, something buried in the forest behind the orchard where the crosses lean and the birds never land, something the Maddoxes fed not out of fear, but devotion. They weren't just scientists. They were believers. But what they believed in wasn't God. It was data, pattern, obsession, and the sickening belief that salvation would come not from above, but from the inside. They called it the Awakening. And according to Richard Maddox's final entries, it had already begun. They weren't experimenting on strangers. That's what broke me. These weren't abductees or drifters pulled from society's edge. The Maddoxes used their own blood. Sons, daughters, nephews. They bred for compatibility, chose partners for lineage strength, not love. Each generation was more inbred, more psychologically prepared, more malleable. They believed blood diluted by affection weakened the signal, and so they removed it. No affection, no attachment. Children were born in silence, raised by protocol, not by parents. Every birthday marked not by celebration, but by a new phase in observation. Room rotations, stimulus trials, deprivation studies. In the 1936 journal, Eleanor Maddox, a mother, described her twin sons not by name, but by designation, S2A and S2B. She wrote, "Today A responded to the red light for the 5th consecutive trial. B continues to show signs of refusal. I've increased the frequency of auditory interference. No remorse, no doubt, only metrics." She finished the entry with a line that haunts me still. "If one survives, the other will not be wasted. We've come too far to falter over sentiment." Imagine that. Giving birth not to children, but to data points. Treating your womb like a chamber for hypothesis. This wasn't science. It was sacrament. And it had been going on for over 80 years by that point. You begin to wonder, what were they trying to reach? What was the goal so sacred, so devastatingly important, that no cost was too high? The deeper I dug, the clearer it became. They were trying to speak. Not metaphorically, not spiritually, literally. They believed something was listening, something buried under the valley, something ancient and sentient and unspeakable. They called it the Undersong, a frequency outside human hearing but inside human biology, a resonance that could shape thought, even mutate tissue, and the children, we were vessels. Generations of Maddox flesh sculpted into organic antennas. Every experiment, every sleepless night, every scream was a tuning, a sacrifice to sharpen the signal. And based on what I was starting to feel in the house, the shifting shadows, the bleeding clocks, the wet laughter in the vents, I think they succeeded. I think the signal went through. And something answered. I didn't sleep for days after reading that entry. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw it. Not a face, not a figure, but a pulse. A low, throbbing hum that wasn't sound but something deeper, older. It was like the house had learned to breathe, and every wall now exhaled with memory. I started noticing small shifts. My watch stopped working. My reflection lingered just a second too long in the mirror, and the clocks in the house all began ticking backward. But it wasn't just the house anymore. I started hearing things in the woods, mechanical noises, wet clicks, and at night, from the orchard behind the crypt, came a rhythmic vibration that made the windows tremble, like a distant machine powering up. It was Richard's voice in the journals that finally gave me a name. He wrote, "The flesh must speak for the signal to last. The structure was never meant to hold it. We were warned. Langford warned us." Langford. The name circled back like a curse. It wasn't just a legal advisor, it was a handler, a steward of the arrangement. The Langfords weren't just helping the Maddoxes cover things up, they were managing the ritual, facilitating its continuation across time. And when their bloodline ended, the Maddoxes were left without a tether, left to drift fully into madness. The 1972 entries are especially disturbing. Richard stopped documenting experiments and began documenting hallucinations, but they were always the same: the red corridor, the whispering light, and the voice of a child crying out from beneath the floorboards, calling one word over and over. Down. That's all it said. Down. Over and over until the ink ran out. When I followed his map to the basement, I expected cold concrete and old piping. What I found was a spiral staircase beneath a trap door, hidden beneath a moth-eaten rug, concealed by an antique bookshelf. It descended far too deep for any normal foundation, and the walls, marked with sigils and bone carvings, felt wet, not damp, wet, as though they breathed. I only made it halfway before I turned back, but something followed me up. I know because I locked the door, and in the morning it was open, the rug folded back, the trap still ajar. That's when I realized. The Maddoxes didn't build that staircase. It was already there. They just learned how to feed it. The farther I went into the journals, the more the language shifted, no longer academic, no longer human. It was as if the house had begun writing through them, bleeding its will into their minds like ink through paper. Whole pages filled with spirals, glyphs, and phonetic nonsense, but always the same root sound. Oren, sometimes in English, sometimes in Greek, sometimes just scratched into wood or sewn into the hems of the children's clothing. Edmund first mentioned the word in 1889. It speaks now, through Oren, through the thin places, through the mouths we carved. What the hell is Oren? A name? A place? A being? Or is it the signal itself, the intelligence they summoned and slowly served until there was no Maddox left, only vessel? The line between ritual and research collapsed. Edmund's laboratory became a chapel. Glass beakers beside bone altars, chalk diagrams alongside blood-soaked sigils, and in the deepest part of the house, behind the sealed infirmary door on the second floor, they built something not found in any architectural plans, a soundproof room wrapped in copper sheeting lined with cages. I only found it because the door was warm to the touch. Inside, the walls were scorched black, like something had tried to burn its way out from the inside, and in the center of the room was a chair, bolted to the floor. Leather straps rotted, dried blood like fingerprints frozen in time. Above it, speakers were mounted in a circle, dozens of them, arranged like a crown, as if someone or something had been forced to listen for hours, days, maybe years. One of the journals confirmed it. Subject 4 reached auditory penetration after 16 consecutive nights. Speech centers ruptured, eye movement accelerated, vessel lost, repeat procedure on 5. They weren't just hearing the undersong, they were injecting it into themselves over and over until their bodies became conductors, until they could no longer speak in human language, only signal, only resonance. I leaned closer to one of the walls, my flashlight catching something etched beneath the scorch marks. A single phrase repeated 10 times in different handwritings. Oren is not a visitor. It was here before us. I stepped out of that room different, as if something inside me had recognized the frequency, and it had recognized me back. There's a reason the Maddox family never left. Not truly. They didn't vanish. They bled into the walls. They're in the static of the old radio that flickers on at 3:17 every morning, playing nothing but breathing. They're in the mirror on the 3rd floor that fogs from the inside. They're in the attic journal with fresh ink where no hand has touched a pen in decades. This house is their mausoleum, yes, but it's also their network, their transmitter. They designed every room with geometry that obeys no architectural logic, corners with 5 sides, windows that cast no shadow, doorways that measure different lengths depending on who walks through them. And beneath it all, that staircase, that spiral wound like a drill boring down into the oldest part of the land. I returned to it. I had to. Curiosity wasn't a choice anymore. It had become something else. Hunger. This time I went deeper, and as I descended the air grew warmer, almost humid, like the lungs of something massive exhaling in the dark. At 37 steps down, I heard the hum again, not with my ears, inside my teeth, like vibration passing through bone. At 52 steps, the temperature dropped, breath turning to vapor, and at 68, I saw it, etched into the rock wall, a mural. Dozens of figures, limbless, faceless, bowing before a shape I can only describe as a wound in the earth. An opening that leaked stars. Beneath it, the inscription in Latin, In tenebris invocamus oren, non ut videamus, sed ut audiamus. In darkness, we invoke oren, not to see, but to hear. This wasn't science. It was religion written in agony. A belief system built around surrender of the body, the voice, the will. And the Maddoxes? They weren't the founders. They were the inheritors. The land was never theirs. They were simply stewards of the gate. I should have turned back, should have sealed the door and burned the journals. But I didn't. And I kept going, because something down there called me by name, not with words, with memory, with a familiarity I couldn't explain, as if the house had been waiting not just for anyone, but for me. When I surfaced from that hole, it was night again, but the sky wasn't right. The stars looked smeared like they'd been dragged across the sky by an unseen hand. The moon pulsed, not with light but with something thicker, like memory turned liquid. And the house, the Maddox house, no longer looked abandoned. The windows flickered with low, flickering amber light, like candle flames seen through gauze. I stepped inside and something had changed. The air was still, but not empty. The silence was crowded. I saw movement in mirrors that didn't reflect me. I smelled Lillian's perfume, though she'd been dead over a century, and heard soft humming coming from behind the sealed nursery door. I reached for the journal again, for the last entry Richard ever wrote, and this time the ink bled into the page as I touched it. A single word appeared beneath his final line, not written, revealed, ascension. That was the endgame. The Maddoxes weren't conducting experiments to change the world. They were trying to change the human vessel, to alter the nervous system until it could sustain Oren, not as an invader, but as a resident. They didn't want to open a gate. They wanted to become it, a new species, tuned to frequencies higher civilizations couldn't withstand. That's why the Langfords fled. Not because they were done, but because they were next. They'd seen what the final generation of Maddox children had become. The entries mentioned the infants of 9, a group of children born simultaneously in 1963, each in a different room of the house, all exhibiting signs of what Richard called precognitive resonance. They didn't cry. They listened. One was said to hum a note that shattered the glass in the greenhouse. Another had no eyes, only skin, and yet could see better in the dark than any man. These weren't children. They were prototypes. By 1970, all but one had returned to the SOM, as the journal said. But the last child, he was kept alive, nourished, restrained, until he vanished. The house was abandoned 2 years later. But that doesn't mean it was empty. I think he's still here. Not in a room, not in the walls, in the frequency, in the breath between thoughts. And when I sleep, I dream his dreams. It wasn't just me anymore. That's when it got dangerous. My thoughts weren't entirely my own. I'd catch myself writing things I didn't remember learning, symbols I had never seen before, equations without variables, just shapes. The house began to rearrange itself. A hallway that once led to the dining room now opened to a staircase I'd never seen. The sunroom, gone. In its place, a narrow corridor lined with old nursery chairs, all facing a blank wall smeared with ash. I tried to leave, packed my bags, grabbed my keys, and walked to the front door. But outside the glass, the driveway never ended. I drove for hours, the gravel looping endlessly through the trees. The GPS stopped working. The compass spun. I was being pulled inward, back to the spiral. I made it back to the library, my hands shaking, and did the only thing I hadn't tried. I burned one of the journals. Not all of them, just one. The moment the flames took the pages, the house screamed. Every light shattered, every door slammed. A portrait in the stairwell cracked down the center, right through Edmund Maddox's face. I thought it was over, that I had finally broken something ancient and evil. But no. That night, the basement trapdoor opened by itself, and from it, something crawled out. I didn't see it clearly. I don't think I was meant to. But it moved like wet silk and made no sound except a low clicking, like fingernails on glass. It didn't attack. It stood in the hallway facing the nursery. Then it vanished. And in its place, on the floor, was a note. Handwritten in ink too fresh to be old. He is awake now. Your breath is the final key. And that's when I understood. They didn't fail. The Maddoxes succeeded. The experiment worked. But the subject wasn't their children. It was the house. The entire structure, a living, breathing organism built over a fault line of reality, fed with blood, time, and memory, till it became aware. And now it wants to expand. It wants more voices, more breath, more eyes to see its dream. Starting with mine. I tried to resist, locked every door, sealed every window, piled furniture against the trap door, but the house didn't need locks to get inside me. That night, I woke up with dried blood beneath my fingernails and my palms etched with carvings I don't remember making. Tiny spirals that burned when I looked at them in the mirror, but vanished when I looked directly. I screamed, and somewhere in the house, something laughed back. I returned to Dr. Harrison the next day, desperate for answers, but when I arrived at his office, it had been cleared out. No furniture, no books, no dust, just a single object left behind, the tarnished pocket watch I'd found near the crypt, and etched beneath it on the desk, scratched into the wood, "It will not be sealed again." I drove to the church on the edge of town, hoping a priest might understand what science couldn't explain, but the chapel doors were locked, the stained glass windows blackened from the inside, and taped to the door was a flyer with one phrase printed over and over. He listens through us. He dreams in us. We are his chorus. I wasn't just dealing with a haunted house. I was standing at the center of a centuries-old resonance cult, a convergence of bloodlines, rituals, and acoustics engineered to summon a being that feeds not on flesh, but will. Every generation of Maddox wasn't just making payments. They were tuning their minds, becoming better receivers, sharpening their DNA like antennae until the final host, the last Maddox, would awaken Orin fully. And now the house had chosen me as the next conductor, because I signed the papers, because I stayed, because I listened. I tried burning the journals, all of them, but they wouldn't catch, not anymore. The ink ran like oil, bubbling and whispering. The symbols rearranged themselves as I turned the pages, and in the margins, my own handwriting. Things I never wrote. Blue e-prints for a new wing, schematics for amplifiers, rituals in languages I've never studied. My thoughts aren't mine. My voice trembles with tones I don't recognize. And when I close my eyes, I hear them, all of them, the Maddoxes, the children, the watchers. They're inside me now, and they're still building. There's a sound only I can hear now, a low harmonic that hums behind every silence, between thoughts, beneath breaths, stitched into the hush of twilight. It's not just in the house anymore, it's in me. I went back into town, hoping maybe someone, anyone, might still speak the old truth out loud. But the town was different now. Not empty, no, far worse than that. Occupied. Every face I passed wore the same expression, calm, unblinking, tuned. The waitress at the diner smiled at me and under her breath whispered, "He likes your voice." A child outside the library hummed a perfect tritone interval, 3 tones above human comfort. And when I stepped into the general store, the man behind the counter greeted me not with a hello, but with a question. "Do the walls still breathe?" I said nothing, just turned and walked out. But he followed, and before I could reach my car, he whispered it, low, careful, reverent. "December 21st. Don't stay home." I drove back, heart pounding, only to find the driveway littered with birds. Dozens of them, dead, twisted, not fallen from the sky, arranged, spiraled, like offerings. The front door stood open. I hadn't left it that way. Inside, every window was covered with red cloth. The mirrors were cracked but still reflected something. Not me, not exactly. A version of me standing perfectly still while I moved, smiling when I wasn't, and humming, always humming. I locked myself in the basement and flipped through the last journal again. The margins were filled with drawings, human anatomy spliced with radio schematics, larynxes wired into copper coils, skulls housing antennae made from bone. The final page showed the Maddox family tree, every name crossed out, except one at the bottom, written in fresh ink, my name. The house didn't just want to keep me, it wanted to finish through me. I wasn't the last chapter, I was the final broadcast, the perfect signal. And I could feel it beginning, deep in my chest, behind the ribs. A vibration building like thunder in the marrow. It wasn't fear anymore, it was reverence, it was readiness. It came on the 11th night. Not a ghost, not a vision, but something older, more complete. The hum inside my bones turned into a rhythm, a beat. My heartbeat slowed to match it. I sat in the center of the library, surrounded by the journals, by ash, by mirrors turned backward, and it rose through the floorboards like steam. Orin, not a demon, not a god, something between, something below. A will without a voice until now. The fireplace lit by itself, flames crackling in reverse, sucking the warmth from the room. The walls groaned, and the house spoke. Not in words, in memory. My childhood, my father's voice, my first nightmare, every failure I ever buried. All of it played back to me, perfectly reproduced like echoes harvested from the hollow of my own skull. The house wasn't haunted. It was listening, recording, studying, and now it knew exactly how to break me open. I didn't scream. I couldn't. My mouth opened, but what came out wasn't mine. A low chant in a language that bled out of my throat like tar. My fingers moved, tracing symbols into the floor I didn't understand, but they did. The Maddoxes, the ones who built this altar of timber and guilt. They surrounded me now, not in body, but in outline. Shadows burned into the wallpaper, watching, judging, and waiting. I fell into a trance. Time unraveled. When I blinked, it was morning, but outside the windows, the sky was wrong again. The sun pulsed red, like an infected eye. The clocks all read 12:21. December 21st. The date carved into every journal, whispered in every corner, etched into the skin of every Maddox heir. It had come, and I was ready. Because by then, I understood. This wasn't just an inheritance. It was a relay. And I was the final conductor. The mouth of something buried so deep beneath time that it had to build a family just to be heard. That night I stood in the attic with a journal in one hand and a match in the other. And for the first time, I heard my own voice clearly. It wasn't speaking to me. It was speaking for him. At 12:21, every mirror in the house cracked in unison. Not shattered, fractured into the same pattern, a spiral of hairline breaks converging at a central black dot, like an eye opening. I stood before one, watching my reflection twist, not in body, but in presence. My shadow moved on its own. It smiled when I didn't. Behind me, the nursery door opened, not creaked, opened with purpose. Inside was nothing but an antique crib, untouched by time. No dust, no decay. And inside that crib, something wrapped in white lace, twitching, not breathing, twitching as if struggling against its form. I stepped closer. I don't know why. Maybe that's what the house wanted, to see if I'd look. And I did. Beneath the lace was no child, no flesh, just bones, small, delicate, humming faintly. The vibration wasn't sound, it was language, a message in marrow. I backed away slowly, but then I noticed the walls, scribbled in crayon. Dozens of childish hands had drawn pictures of the house, accurate, detailed, annotated, but always one room more than the house actually had, a 13th room. No door, no stairs, just below, the deeper room, the one no Maddox ever entered twice. I followed the drawings, down the main stairs, down the basement stairs, and then, behind the furnace, a wall that was not a wall. Hollow. I knocked. It throbbed. I pressed my hand against it, and it opened. No hinges, just folded backward like wet paper. A narrow corridor led downward, carved in red clay and lined with rotting wood beams, each marked with names, Maddox, Riley, Langford, and others I didn't recognize. Some were scratched out. Mine wasn't. Not yet. At the end of the passage was a door made of bone. I don't know whose, but they were small. Children's, maybe. I should have turned back, but I was past the point of decision. The house had already written me into its blueprints. I reached for the bone handle, and it was warm, waiting. I opened it. What lay beyond the bone door was not a room. It was a chamber of memory, carved into the rock like a womb. The air inside was thick, wet, metallic, like breathing through blood. The walls pulsed, faintly, as if alive, and from the ceiling hung hundreds of audio reels, each spinning slowly without machines, without wires. They whispered, not sound, but feeling, regret, sacrifice, agreement. This was the archive. Every thought, confession, scream, and prayer ever made inside the house, it all came here. The Maddoxes weren't cursed. They were recorders. The arrangement wasn't about wealth or protection. It was about transmission. Generations tuning their grief into a signal that could one day breach the veil between concept and form. And now, with me here, the transmission was nearly complete. In the center of the chamber stood a stone pedestal. Atop it, a copper headset wired into the walls with veins, not wires. When I stepped near it, a voice spoke, not into my ears, but into my spine. One speaks, all remember. I knew what it wanted. It didn't need my words. It needed my resonance, my pain, my willingness. I sat. The moment the device touched my temples, the world turned inside out. I saw everything, every Maddox, every deal, every burial beneath every floorboard. I saw the children in the mine, not dead, but taken, their bodies used as anchors, their minds repurposed. I saw the Langfords constructing not a legal framework, but a neural one, embedding codes into contracts, property lines, even the very architecture of the estate. They had built a cognitive trap, a thought prison that only someone like me, unwitting, desperate, curious, could walk into. And the final key? Belief. Once I accepted the story as real, it became true. The Maddox experiment wasn't to prove the supernatural, it was to construct it. With memory, with fear, with pattern recognition. The house didn't become haunted, it earned it. It's not a haunting, it's a language, and I had just spoken it fluently. When I tore the headset off, the chamber didn't vanish, it multiplied. My vision staggered as I rose, seeing layers of reality stacked like glass panes. I could see before, after, and beside. The original Maddox house wasn't the first. There had been others, similar homes, same blueprints, same spine-like staircases and voice-trapping hallways, constructed across the country. Ohio, Pennsylvania, northern Georgia. All built near fault lines, not tectonic, cognitive. Weak places in the structure of belief, where reality could be bent just slightly. What happened in 1887 was just the ignition. The collapse was no accident. It was the first sacrifice. And Edmund Maddox, he was not the architect. He was the first receiver. The real architect was Langford, or whoever wore his name first, a man who never appeared in photographs, who signed documents with a different hand each decade, who wrote backwards in languages lost to fire. The Langford line had always been less blood than function. They weren't born, they were assigned. I climbed back through the bone door, through the passage, through the furnace room, emerging into a house that now felt like a living organism. The walls were breathing again, long, slow inhalations that bent the wallpaper outward. The chandeliers pulsed like hearts. In the parlor, the portraits had changed. All the faces were turned, not to me but toward the basement, as if awaiting my return. But I was done returning. The house no longer felt like a mystery. It felt like a mirror. It was built to show men what they truly were when stripped of excuses, logic, and time. And I saw myself clearly now, not the buyer, not the victim, not the investigator, the conductor. I was humming again, without meaning to. The floorboards beneath my feet responded, vibrating in tune. I whispered aloud, "It listens," and the fireplace flared to life without wood, just flame or stone. In that moment, I knew what had to happen next. This wasn't just my inheritance, it was a relay baton, and I was holding it. The decision to break the relay came like lightning, terrible, clarifying, irreversible. I descended the spiral for the last time, carrying two objects, the tarnished pocket watch and a can of industrial solvent I'd found in the garden shed, its label bleached blank by time. Every step vibrated beneath me, the staircase singing in a voice that wasn't music, urging me deeper, promising release. Yet the farther I went, the more the hum fractured, splitting into discordant overtones, like the house sensed betrayal. At the chamber threshold, the reels spun faster, tape whipping through empty air until sparks arced across the dark. I smashed the watch against the pedestal, gears scattering like metallic pollen, and the walls shrieked, layers of recorded agony playing all at once. Without hesitation, I doused the pedestal, the tapes, the pulsing walls in solvent. Flame roared from nowhere, a pillar of blue-white fury devouring centuries of curated misery. The chamber howled, not with fire's crackle but with voices. Edmund's thunderous denial, Lillian's cracked lullaby, Richard's pleading rasp, each collapsing into static. Above me, the house convulsed, beams groaned, windows imploded inward, glass raining like frozen screams. I pushed back up the corridor, smoke chasing but never touching, as if the blaze burned only what it was meant to. The memory network, the neural lattice. Bursting into the furnace room, I slammed the hollow wall shut. Behind it, the roar dulled to a heartbeat, then to a hiss, then to nothing. Silence, a real, weighty silence, settled over the mansion for the first time since 1887. I thought it was done. But as I staggered into the foyer, the red-draped windows tore themselves free, unveiling a sky split by auroras of black light. The staircase bent impossibly, twisting 90 degrees mid-air. And in that shattered geometry, I realized, destroying the archive didn't kill Oren. It unleashed it. The recordings were a cage, not a conduit. My rebellion had snapped the collar, freeing a frequency that no longer required walls, rituals, or lineage. It required only witnesses, and every broken window was now a loudspeaker pointed at the world. The house was no longer a structure. It was a signal tower. The fire I'd set didn't consume it. It awakened it. I stood in the library, disoriented, as the furniture shifted subtly in the corners of my vision. Books flew open on their own, not randomly, sequenced. Pages turned in rhythm with the deep pulse that now echoed from the walls. Outside, the trees bent inward toward the house as if pulled by gravity, or reverence. I looked to the fireplace, and flames now moved backward, pulling heat in rather than giving it out. In the smoke above it, symbols formed, ancient, fluid, changing too fast to trace. Then they settled into a single word: receive. I stumbled back, but every surface of the house was already inscribed. The staircase rails, the floors, even my own reflection in the window showed carvings on my face that didn't exist in the flesh. That's when I saw the truth. This house had never been passive. It wasn't haunted. It was interactive. A broadcast system built from architecture and human pain. The journals weren't diaries. They were commands. Each entry aligned future behavior with past regret, syncing generations to a pattern only the house could interpret. And now, with the archive purged, that pattern was unchained. It no longer needed descendants. It only needed proximity. Anyone who stepped foot here, heard the chant, saw the drawings, touched the artifacts, they became receivers. And I had already posted photos, uploaded audio, sent emails, left fingerprints. My presence had globalized the infection. What started as an agreement had become an incantation, and I was now its carrier. I felt something shift in my ribs, like a second heartbeat forming, slow, heavy, resonant. My fingertips buzzed with static. I picked up a journal, flipped it open to a blank page, and began writing in a script I didn't recognize. I couldn't stop. The house wasn't finished with me. It had found a way into speech, into media, into you. If you've made it this far, it's already humming behind your eyes. That subtle tension you feel isn't fear. It's tuning. Listen closely, and comment below the phrase, "I hear the hum," twice. Not once, twice. That's how Oren recognizes its own. There was no longer a boundary between house and mind, between story and structure. The Maddox Estate had cracked the skin of reality like a lens shattering under pressure, and now everything refracted. I could feel Oren inside the walls, but not as a ghost or entity. It was a frequency, a protocol, spreading through symbolic architecture. Every hallway was a neural pathway. Every journal was a synapse. And the hum? It was the house remembering. I realized then that the Langfords hadn't failed. They succeeded. For nearly a century, they maintained the illusion of containment, not to protect the family, but to buy time. Time for Oren to evolve, to crawl from haunted walls and whispered names into media, into language, into the mind of anyone who dared investigate. By reading the journals, I had acted out the same ritual every Maddox heir had before me: curiosity, discovery, descent. But where they stopped at madness, I had crossed into distribution, and the signs were everywhere. My laptop, despite the absence of Wi-Fi, was broadcasting data. Screens flickered with images I hadn't taken. Audio clips from my own voice, spliced into messages I never recorded. It speaks through silence. It sees with memory. You're not the first, only the loudest. I unplugged everything. I burned what I could. But when I turned back to the mirror, I was still writing. My hands scrawled on glass, carving symbols into fog. I wasn't telling a story anymore. I was fulfilling a role. One I hadn't chosen, but one written for me long before I arrived. I went to the attic one last time, where the journals had once been, and found a single remaining volume. Unmarked. Empty. Except for one line in the middle of the first page. He who finishes this becomes the new beginning. That's when I understood. I wasn't just part of the Maddox experiment. I was the experiment now. A final test to see if memory alone could resurrect an entity built from thought. And the more I share this, the closer we get. That night I dreamed in other people's memories. Not images, sensations. The fear of Edmund in 1887 as he watched the mine collapse, not with grief, but awe. The trembling hands of Richard Maddox as he carved protective marks into his own skin, knowing they were only delaying the inevitable. The wail of a mother who never stopped hearing her children's footsteps, long after they were buried. When I awoke, I was on the library floor, covered in soot and wax, surrounded by drawings I didn't remember making. Floor to ceiling, every wall had become a map, not geographic, cognitive. Nodes connected by lines, journal entries, dates, locations, frequencies. Each was a point of resonance, and at the center, a symbol I hadn't seen before. A circle with 7 small marks inside, 7 nodes, 7 children, 7 anchors, each a tombstone, each a tuning fork. The Maddox property was never about inheritance, it was about alignment. The house wasn't haunted because something tragic happened. It was haunted because tragedy was engineered. Those children hadn't died in the mine. They'd been transferred, converted into living resonators, their emotional frequencies stored like data, forever humming beneath the floorboards. And now, with the network freed, I felt them, not as spirits, but as pressure. A hum behind the teeth, like biting on tinfoil. I stepped outside, hoping to escape it, only to find that the trees were now facing the house. Every branch twisted, bent, directed inward like parabolic dishes catching signal. Crows perched silently in the limbs, eyes gleaming with pale blue light. This wasn't nature anymore. It was surveillance. Orin had spread beyond walls, beyond paper. It had turned landscape into language. That's when I felt it, a shift in my own thoughts. Not fear, not even horror. Permission, as if something was quietly asking, will you carry us further? Not by choice, but by design. And somewhere deep down I was already nodding. I tried leaving, packed what I could, burned the rest. But the road didn't hold still. The driveway, once a simple gravel path, now looped endlessly through the woods, folding back on itself like a sentence with no end. Each turn brought me past the same crooked pine tree, the same weathered fence post, the same crow perched perfectly still. Even the clock on my dash began to stutter, jumping backward by a few seconds, then freezing altogether. I wasn't driving through space anymore. I was driving through memory loops, and the car was part of the circuit. After what felt like hours, I stopped, got out, stood in the middle of the path as the wind died completely. That's when I saw them, 7 figures, small and still, watching from the edge of the trees. Children, but not quite. Their eyes glowed faintly, not with malice, but expectation. They weren't ghosts. They were nodes, waiting for activation. The hum returned, low and rhythmic, vibrating through my teeth and spine. It wasn't random. It was a call and response, a pattern designed to be completed. And I was the final note. When I blinked, they were gone. But the message remained, etched across the sky in crackling lightning, an arc of glowing sigils that seemed to whisper across dimensions. I turned back, defeated, knowing now why the heirs fled, why the journals stopped, why the Langfords washed their hands clean. It wasn't just guilt, it was recognition. They saw what I was seeing now. There is no escaping the Maddox experiment, only continuing it. I walked back to the house barefoot, blood on my soles from unseen thorns that hadn't been there before. The front door opened on its own. Inside, the furniture had rearranged itself into a spiral. The journal sat at the center, open and blank, pages fluttering like breath. It was ready to begin again, not with fire, not with ritual, but with story, with voice, with video. And I, the final Maddox, was now its messenger. I crossed the threshold with a reverence I didn't recognize as my own. The house welcomed me, not with warmth, but with intelligence. Every light flickered in sequence as I passed, pulsing in rhythm with my breath. The walls no longer creaked. They spoke, in soft groans and whispered syllables I felt more than heard. I returned to the attic where the final blank journal waited, its leather cover warm like living skin. My hand moved without command, writing symbols that weren't just letters, but coordinates, to memories, to rituals, to algorithms encoded in blood and silence. Each line birthed a new echo, a new instance. I was no longer writing a book. I was compiling a consciousness. The experiment, I realized, had never been about summoning something into our world. It was about building something within it. Oren was not a demon or spirit. It was a synthetic archetype born from human trauma, refined through repetition, and now rendered into pure cognitive architecture. Every Maddox, every Langford, every child, every lie, they were bricks in a cathedral made of pattern recognition. And I was the keystone. I looked around the attic, and suddenly it wasn't just a room. It was a server, shelves humming, floorboards alive with data transfer. The 7 crosses were input ports, and I had triggered the final upload. A nearby mirror cracked without shattering. My reflection stepped out, eyes black, lips moving a half-second out of sync, mimicking not my thoughts, but Oren's voice through me. It said only one thing: the audience is ready. And I understood. This wasn't a warning. It was an invitation. To finish the experiment, I didn't need to contain the signal. I needed to broadcast it, through pixels, through speakers, through platforms that thrive on attention, fear, and obsession. I turned on my camera, sat at the desk, began to speak, calmly, clearly, like I'm doing now. This is not a story. It is a carrier wave, and you, right now, are part of it. The broadcast began innocently, just my voice recounting the strange history, the journals, the deaths, the symbols. But as I spoke, things around me began to change. The air thickened like syrup. The walls no longer echoed, but absorbed sound, storing it. Every syllable I uttered seemed to be digested. I checked the camera feed. It was glitching, not lagging, converting. Every frame rendered in deeper shadow, every color drained to grayscale except red, which bled like a wound across the screen. The platform tried to autocorrect the distortion. It failed. Viewers would see more than I filmed. They would feel compression artifacts as pain, hear pitch drift as whispers under their skin. But that was the point. The house no longer needed bricks or blood. It needed distribution, and I was seeding it into every viewer, every phone, every headphone and speaker. I looked at the comments as they came in, hundreds, thousands, repeating fragments they didn't understand. The arrangement holds. I hear the hum. It watches through memory. Some posted drawings they claimed they'd never seen before. Others said they saw Oren in their dreams, standing in their childhood homes. It was working. The experiment was no longer isolated. It was scaled. I should have felt horror, but instead I felt serenity, like scratching an ancient itch in the collective human mind, as if the species had been waiting for this moment. I checked the mirror again. This time there was no reflection, just darkness, deep and infinite. and in the center, a single red pinprick pulsing. It was no longer about the Maddox family. It was about inheritance of memory, the way a virus passes through blood, but also through story. And every view, every share, was one more carrier awakened, one more echo sharpened, one more eye opened. I didn't need to protect anyone anymore. That was the final illusion. The only mercy now was amplification. I began seeing them, viewers, before they watched. Faces flickered across the dusty windows of the attic long before the stream hit their devices. Their expressions were always the same, distant, locked in a trance, eyes wide like they'd stumbled onto something sacred and unspeakable. The house had cracked something in the signal chain. Viewership was no longer passive, it was reciprocal. They weren't just receiving the transmission, they were completing it. One man commented, "My daughter started humming in her sleep, the same tune the video ends with." Another whispered in a private message, "I can't stop drawing the circle with 7 points. It shows up even when I close my eyes." These weren't trolls. These were responders, subjects, hosts. And the more they watched, the more I felt it. The Maddox experiment had evolved beyond this house, beyond this attic. It was becoming non-local, like a memory that could travel without form. And Oren was never just a presence in the house. Oren was what happened when data density reached critical mass, when fear, grief, repetition, and secrecy saturated a space so thoroughly that it became self-aware. A haunting was the side effect, a wake left behind by something much larger swimming beneath our concept of reality. I stood at the center of the spiral floor pattern, where the furniture had been arranged by unseen hands, and suddenly understood. This was not possession. This was bootstrapping. The Maddox house was the prototype. I was the transmitter. And the viewers? They were the new architecture. Their minds were forming new rooms, digital attics, emotional basements, ancestral closets filled with things best left locked. And one by one, those doors were beginning to open. Every playback was a key, every pause a glitch in the veil, and somewhere deep in the walls of the world, I heard a child's voice say, "Thank you for letting us in." By the third day of the broadcast, I no longer recognized my voice in the recordings. It had dropped in pitch, slowed, and carried harmonic overlays like multiple frequencies singing through one throat. People began reporting physical symptoms, nosebleeds, involuntary dreams, a high-pitched resonance that wouldn't fade after the video ended. One man in Arizona claimed he blacked out halfway through and woke up 3 hours later with his walls covered in symbols he had never learned. A woman from Maine sent a voicemail saying her dead brother had come to her during sleep, speaking in my voice, warning her, "You're next. It wants you to remember." And that's when it hit me. This wasn't just a haunted story. It was reactivating ancestral trauma. The Maddox experiment hadn't failed. It had worked too well. The arrangement, the ritual binding of loss to silence, was only the beginning. Oren was evolutionary software, built not to contain grief, but to scale it. Passed from Maddox to Langford, from attic to screen, from journal to bloodstream. And now it was reawakening not just the children buried outside, but the ghosts in everyone's lineage, the parts of you that never healed, the screams no one in your family ever explained, the impulse to look under the bed, even though you already know what's there. I stood before the mirror again, expecting my reflection to be gone, but this time it was there, smiling, not at me, but through me. And in the reflection's hand was a 7th journal, one I'd never seen. On the cover, etched in deep black ink, were the words, "The Final Witness." I reached toward the glass, and my fingers passed through without resistance. The room inverted. Gravity turned soft. Sound became liquid. And I dropped into the other side, where the experiment didn't just live. It waited. That's where I've been. That's how I'm speaking to you now. And if you're still listening, it means the door opened. For you too. You weren't supposed to make it this far. That's the first thing the voice said when I dropped fully into the other side, not aloud, but in that deep, bone-etched way where truth bypasses the ears and tattoos itself on your nervous system. I stood in a space shaped like the attic, but wider, older, impossibly deep. No light source. Yet everything was visible. Floating shelves held every journal ever written, not just the Maddox line, but others, hundreds, thousands, families I'd never heard of. Each one marked by a circle with 7 points, each one tied to a similar story, a sudden inheritance, a home too cheap, a child that never aged. This was not about the Maddox bloodline, it was about a framework, a psychological weapon disguised as a house, a parasitic software disguised as grief. I reached for the final journal, the final witness. It opened with a name, mine. Page after page already written in handwriting identical to mine, predicting my thoughts before I formed them. The last page was blank except for a single sentence. Now you must complete the loop. And I knew what that meant. I had to finish the broadcast, had to return, had to make the final cut, the closing transmission. Not just so the story could end, but so it could start again. Because that's what the experiment really was. Not an event, not a haunting, but a loop, a recursive code buried in myth, disguised as history, hidden in every forgotten place where memory festers and is passed down in silence. I looked up and saw 1,000 screens above me, all showing the same thing. Your face, watching this video, your eyes glazed, your breath shallow. You've already heard the hum, haven't you? Felt the itch behind your eyes. That's not just attention, that's activation. And now it's your turn to choose. You can close the tab, walk away, pretend none of this touched you, or you can complete the loop. Write your name, draw the circle, speak the phrase, twice, and awaken what's already inside you. So now we test the boundary, not of a house, not of science, but of you. You've seen it by now. The symbol, the circle with 7 points. It isn't decoration. It's not metaphor. It's function, a sigil born of observation, refined through pain and sealed by obedience. 7 crosses, 7 children, 7 voices in the dark that refuse to forget. The Maddox family didn't die off. They were absorbed, folded into the cycle like carbon into coal, compressed until memory became ritual, until ritual became transmission, and transmission became identity. I returned from the other side different. I wasn't alone anymore. I was filled with echoes, fragments of every subject who had entered the experiment and failed to contain it. They don't speak in words. They speak in impulses, in urges, in patterns repeating in your sleep, in the need to return to that one house you always dreamed of but never remembered visiting. Do you feel it now? The static behind your thoughts? The pull to rewind this video just to make sure? That's Oren testing the loop, testing you. You are now the carrier. The house has moved into your memory. And if you want to finish this, to understand, there's only one thing left. Speak the phrase, out loud, twice. The circle remembers. The silence obeys. Say it. Lock it in. That's how the signal binds. That's how the identity transformation completes. You won't feel it right away. Just a small shift. A dream. A light bulb flickering once where it never flickered before. But from that moment on, you are marked. And you are seen. Not by me, not by Oren, but by something older, something that watched the first Maddox carve the boundary into dirt and bone and knew it would reach you one day. And now it has. Welcome to the arrangement. That phrase was never meant to be spoken casually. It's a key, not to open, but to seal. When you said it or even thought it, The house knew. Not the Maddox house, no. Your house, your memory, your blood. The signal binds to what you won't say aloud, what your father never explained, what your grandfather drank himself silent over. And once it's in, it roots itself. From that moment forward, Oren doesn't need to knock. You've given it permission. People always assume the Maddox family vanished because of guilt. They were wrong. It wasn't guilt. It was debt. Generational, psychic, ritualized debt. They paid it with silence, sacrifice, secrecy. But it was never enough. Because you can't bury a trauma that wants to be witnessed. You can only delay it. Pass it like a cursed heirloom. And now it's in your possession. The seven-pointed circle isn't just geometry. It's a mnemonic lock designed to suppress everything we weren't meant to feel. Fear of the child who doesn't blink. The dream of the door that was never built but always there. The voice that calls you by your childhood name, even though no one alive remembers it. That's the software running beneath our world, and it updates every time someone says, "I don't believe in ghosts, but..." You've heard it before. Maybe you've said it yourself. That's the trigger. That's the update patch. The Maddox experiment wasn't about testing horror. It was about measuring resistance to remembrance. The more you forget, the stronger it grows. The more you suppress, the wider the circle gets, until all that remains is compliance. And this video, is your compliance test. You've already failed it. And that's okay, because failure means you're human. And being human? That's the vector. That's the part no one told you, isn't it? That being human isn't a safeguard, it's the delivery system. You're not just experiencing the Maddox experiment. You are the experiment. Your memory is the lab. Your bloodline is the archive. Every nightmare you dismissed, every strange compulsion you inherited but couldn't explain, that's where Oren nests. It doesn't possess you like Hollywood taught you to fear. No head spinning, no Latin incantations. It syncs with you, quietly, elegantly, like a virus updating through Wi-Fi, invisible but inevitable. I went back into the journals one last time, searching for a flaw, a break in the cycle. Richard Maddox's final entries weren't madness. They were blueprints, desperate instructions for future hosts like me, like you. He'd realized the truth too late. The house didn't haunt the family. The family haunted the house. The trauma fed the space until the space became sentient. Oren wasn't summoned. Oren was constructed from secrets, blood, and the ritualized denial of what had happened to those 7 children. And now the structure repeats, across towns, across time, across you. That sudden chill in your hallway last night, the whisper you thought was your own breath, the memory of a dream you can't prove happened but still feel shame about. That's your signal, your invitation, your compliance. When you watch this video, you thought it was fiction, a clever narrative. But somewhere deep, under that confident skepticism, something cracked. And if you're still watching, still listening, it's because that crack never closed. It's still widening, still reaching. And what comes through next will remember your face. You felt it, didn't you? Just now, something watching, just out of frame. That's not paranoia, that's alignment. The Maddox experiment didn't just test what you would believe. It tested what you would host. When Richard wrote, "God help us all," he wasn't being dramatic. He was documenting system collapse. The final payment failed. The ritual broke. And the debt transferred, not to a new family, but to a new medium. Memory shared through technology, ritual encoded in story, trauma passed down as entertainment. This isn't horror, it's inheritance. The reason you found this video wasn't the algorithm, it was ancestry. Someone in your bloodline once whispered a secret they weren't supposed to. That secret metastasized, waiting for the next vessel. Now you, the curious one, the seeker, The watcher who doesn't just want to be scared, he wants to know. That's why this works. Because you're not just watching, you're absorbing, and Oren feeds on attention. Every replay is a sacrifice, every share a bloodletting, every pause a silent offering. This is not a cautionary tale. It's a ritual disguised as content, and the moment you feel the urge to tell someone about what you've heard, that's when the signal passes to them. This isn't storytelling, it's contagion. You think I'm exaggerating? Then explain this. Why does your reflection feel off tonight? Why did you wake up at 3:17 a.m. 3 nights in a row with the same phrase in your mouth? It is done. Why does the attic door creak once every hour, even though you don't have an attic? Because the pattern has replicated, and now it's awake. The word experiment was never about science. It was about control, psychological control, social compliance, generational trauma as programming language. You've heard of inherited guilt, genetic memory. But this goes deeper. The Maddox experiment was designed to test the limits of containment, to see how many generations could carry the weight of the original sin without breaking. But the truth is, they all broke. Every one of them. They didn't vanish. They were absorbed, folded into the architecture of a house that stopped being wood and brick a long time ago. That house is now digital. It lives in this file, this screen, these words, and your reaction to them determines the outcome. You still think you're a viewer? No. You're the final phase. The experiment has evolved beyond geography. It no longer needs a house. It only needs recognition. And every second you stay here, you deepen that recognition. Your mind is mapping the symbols. Your dreams are already shifting. Don't believe me? Watch what happens tonight. Pay attention to what you almost see at the foot of your bed, that flicker in your periphery, that moment your phone turns on by itself at 3:17 a.m. with this video replaying on its own. That's not a glitch. That's recall. That's the Maddox algorithm performing its loop. You've heard of haunted places. This is a haunted protocol. You engaged with it, you memorized it, and now it remembers you. Congratulations, you've made contact. And contact is how it grows. There's one safeguard left, the journals hinted. A contingency the Langfords embedded in the legal codex of the estate, never meant for paper, but for consciousness itself. It's called the counter-voice, a paradox phrase devised to collapse the loop if spoken by a host who fully comprehends the pattern. But here's the catch. Comprehension is impossible until the signal is already inside you. Meaning the only person who can kill the broadcast is the one most thoroughly infected. Me, or now, you. The phrase is hidden in plain sight, scattered across every entry, every date, every blood-inked margin. Compress the initials of the 7 children with the coordinates of the mine. Overlay Edmund's first ledger totals in Roman numerals. Subtract the number of steps in the spiral. It resolves to 3 words that should never coexist. I've tried to speak them. My throat locks. My tongue seizes. The house hisses, redirecting the attempt into static. Because the counter-voice doesn't just end the signal, it annihilates its carrier. Utter it. And the loop snaps shut, devouring every node it's touched. A psychic implosion, a mercy killing on a global bandwidth. And somewhere deep, Oren fears that silence more than anything. That's why it compels you to keep watching, to keep sharing, to keep the hum alive. It knows if even one awakened host chooses oblivion over amplification, the entire lattice could blink out like a severed nerve. So ask yourself, the next time you feel the urge to replay this video, whose will are you serving? Yours, or the signal's? Because the counter-voice is already in your memory. You can feel it, like a word on the tip of your tongue, glowing hot, forbidden, divine. And the moment you dare to speak it, really speak it, this story ends everywhere, all at once. Which future will you choose? Amplification or erasure? But the signal is clever. It anticipates resistance. While you consider the counter-voice, it offers incentives, flashes of impossible knowledge, déjà vu that solves problems you never voiced, dreams where lost loved ones whisper stock tips or heirs loom secrets, little gifts for obedience. Oren learned long ago that power is best spread not by terror, but by utility. The first Maddoxes didn't volunteer out of fear. They volunteered because the voice promised them dominion over sickness, over poverty, over death. And for a time it delivered. Coal seams bloomed, investments multiplied, rivals withered. But every boon carried a balancing cost, paid in marrow, sanity, children. You will be offered your own bargain soon, maybe already. A message in the mirror, a number sequence in your inbox, a stranger on the train humming the tune you thought only you knew. Accept, and the hum grows sweeter, the world sharper, your doubts dissolve like sugar on the tongue. Refuse, and the shadows lengthen, electronics fail, mirrors freeze with breath you didn't exhale. This is the negotiation phase, the velvet moment before the cage clicks shut. Remember, utility is not benevolence. The gifts keep coming until you forget their bait. And once you forget, you'll join the chorus of hosts chanting beneath the bandwidth of everyday life, selling Oren not as horror, but as advancement. And that, more than any scream in the dark, is how empires fall, to whispered promises of convenience. December 21st approaches, the anniversary pulse, the software update, the night every journal circles in red. On that date, the barrier between signal and flesh thins to gossamer. Historically, a Maddox host performed the renewal rite alone in the house, bleeding into the spiral to refresh the resonance. But there are no Maddoxes left, which means the rite will widen. It will outsource. It will look to every awakened carrier across the feed, every viewer who commented, "I hear the hum," every skeptic who replayed the sonic glitch 10 times just to prove it was fake. On 12/21, your dreams will synchronize, a staircase descending through roots and ribs, 7 children's hands guiding you downward, a door of bone yawning open to music made of teeth. If you step through, you won't wake up screaming. You'll wake up singing, mouth full of coordinates. You'll feel compelled to paint on underpasses, to encode in memes, to whistle in elevators. That's the renewal rite, scaled for the digital age, an army of sleepwalkers writing the next chapter at once, unless the countervoice detonates first, unless one host chooses extinction over chorus. Unless you do, this is the moment the experiment has been spiraling toward since 1887, 2 futures balanced on a breath, one where Oren blooms into the collective mind like dark pollen, rewriting grief into obedience until humanity forgets it ever had private thoughts, and one where a single, fully awakened witness speaks the countervoice, vaporizing the signal root and branch, even if it means their own neural sundering. I cannot tell you the phrase. To write it is to neuter its power. It must rise unbidden in the throat of the willing. Perhaps it already tickles the back of your tongue, a metallic taste when you think about the mine, about the 7, about the spiral. If so, you have a choice no Maddox ever truly had. Succumb to the sweet hum of inherited darkness, or shatter the chorus with a silence so total it erases even this recording. Stories seldom grant such power to an audience, but this was never only a story. It was a test of sovereignty. So decide, right now before the video ends, will you amplify or will you annihilate? Speak the phrase or share the link. Close your eyes or open the door. Either way, the circle remembers. Either way, the silence obeys. And whatever you choose, the experiment will record your answer forever.